This session will be moderated by Ms. Swagata De, who is a policy specialist in atmospheric composition observations group within the air quality sector at CSTEP. Ms. De will be inviting and introducing our speakers. Let's welcome Ms. Swagata De to the stage.
Good morning and welcome back. So, as somebody who works in air quality and has had dealt with climate change, and the discussion is how do you bring them two together? I'm from Delhi and with very strong roots to Kolkata and now Bangalore. What I see is not only are our cities polluted with the air pollution problem, the way our weather pattern, Delhi was growing up, we had a desert cooler at home. Now, if you have a desert cooler, you will die. You need an air conditioner. Kolkata, the season of mangoes has shifted, and you're breathing dirty air pretty much throughout the year, more in Delhi than in Kolkata. So, do we still bifurcate the two problems as a growing country? So, to explore this topic, I am very, very honored and privileged to welcome three very, very illustrious guests. I will start with, may I please call upon Shri Ashish Tiwari on stage, a member of, most of us know Dr. Tiwari from various forums. Shri Tiwari, on, little bit, sir. A member of the Indian Forest Service with more than 25 years of proven excellence spanning across policy and planning at the Secretariat. He's currently Secretary, Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Government of Uttar Pradesh. He has served as Member Secretary, UPPCB, Member Secretary, UP State Climate Change Authority, and various other senior positions. What is common across this illustrative career is he has demonstrated history. Can we shut that door, please, and that weird noise that it's making? Thank you. He has a demonstrated history of working in the government and also within the local community with a wide range of stakeholders. And most people in this room have at some point interacted with him, worked with him, and we know what is, he's so open to ideas and, the betterment of Uttar Pradesh and as a country of whole. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Next up, I would like to call upon another very, very familiar name, Anumita Roy Chaudhary. Anumita ma'am is the Executive Director of Research and Advocacy at CSE, Center for Science and Environment, Delhi. And she's also had a distinguished career encompassing a wide range of contribution to the field of sustainable urbanization, including clean air, sustainable mobility, and sustainable mobility. She has helped to drive the Right to Clean Air campaign at the center and played an active role in several national and global environmental forums. And she's been awarded the prestigious Hagen-Smith Climate Award by the California Air Resources Board. A story about Anumita ma'am is I was in 10th standard when the Delhi, they just decided to go off Blue Line buses and diesel buses and have CNG. It was difficult, schools were shut down, and this was I'm old, just so that you're wondering, so there's no question of a Zoom classroom, right? But after those initial difficult 3-4 months, things resumed back to normal, and we had much cleaner air in Delhi for at least a few 10-15 years. And later on, years later, when I would go on to work with Anumita ma'am, my first boss in India, after I made the trip across the Atlantic, I realized it was them who had driven that change. And it's not easy to drive change, so CSE has been doing that. Welcome, ma'am. And finally, Aarti Khosla. Aarti, please come up. Oh, I can see you. All right. She's the Director of Climate Trends, and she's a founder of Climate Trends in India with 24 years of experience working on communication efforts across development, environmental, and mainstream space, and experienced manager of communication. So Aarti not only works on communication issues, but also this whole messaging that has to go out to everyone. That is something. Can I request somebody from CSTEP staff to check on this, please? Thank you. I really appreciate that. So this messaging that has gone out, Aarti has been largely responsible for that. She holds an MBA in Marketing from Institute of Management Studies and an undergraduate degree from Delhi University. May I please have a round of applause for these panelists, and we will start with Tiwari sir, who will present his vision on this topic, and then we'll hear from the other two. The way I want to do this is let each panelist give their opening remarks. I have a guided Q&A, but of course I'm waiting to hear from this August panel. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Swagata, and a very good morning to all. I first of all thank you all to have gathered for brainstorming on harmonizing clean air actions and climate action, which is, we'll understand that why it is needed and what are the challenges. Coming from a largest state, in a way the largest country, sixth largest country in the world, that is Uttar Pradesh, the challenges of air quality management and local climate action are very, you can say, difficult, and particularly in view of when the state is developing at a faster rate towards becoming $1 trillion economy by 2028. There had been narratives of health impacts of air quality, which I think everyone will appreciate is very true and very relevant, but has not picked up in our country. So the opportunity rests on building a narrative that air quality management is actually climate action. We all know that the health impacts of climate change are also very serious, be it heat wave, be it feels like, be it floods, be it flash floods, etc., like equally serious. And the country has started understanding and appreciating the health impacts of climate change and air pollution as well. So this gives us an opportunity to actually harmonize and synergize both the fields so that they become more impactful when basically go together. Now, why harmonizing? We all know that tackling air pollution and climate change is very crucial so far as humanity's short, medium and long-term well-being is concerned. This is a positive opportunity for harmonization, and secondly, mitigating nitrous emissions and SLCPs offers a very strong opportunity to harmonize climate action and air quality management. Reducing short-lived climate pollutants is a fast response because the global warming potential, they are short-lived, but the global warming potential of SLCPs is very high. So it can give you a very, you can say, a near-term solution to the climate change and air quality, air pollution management as well. Then I think when you bring them together, it can offer a wider support to both of them. When both the things are united, I think they will become stronger. Climate change seems a distant threat, but if you couple it with AQM, air quality management, then it can bring problem and solutions in the forefront, particularly for developing countries like India. So that is kind of a strength of harmonizing air quality management and climate action. there had been global initiatives and challenges too. One is that most countries have not explicitly committed to mitigate short-lived climate pollutants. Methane and HFCs are covered under UNFCCC, that is a strength. Global Methane Pledge, which was taken in 2021, which envisages 30% reduction of methane emissions compared to 2020 level by 2030, but our country is not a signatory to that. That is also a challenge. There are valid and strong reasons for that also. That first it has to come under UNFCCC framework. Then that was the thinking in our country. Then black carbon is not part of greenhouse gas covered under UNFCCC framework. Then there is a trade-off, which everyone knows, that the hazardous air pollutants has a cooling effect on planet also. So these are the challenge areas which actually gives us a kind of insight that we have to very, very carefully define the pathways for harmonizing climate actions and air quality management. We have started doing this in a state of Uttar Pradesh, and this, sorry, I missed this slide for you. So this slide actually gives you some idea that how they are related. It was a music to my ears when I heard Ramaji talking about indoor air pollution. We are trying to bring a very large scale project for clean cooking under our World Bank supported air quality UP Clean Air Management Project. And also with IGSD we are developing what kind of climate co-benefits can be derived from that. The figures are before you. This is kind of a modeling which has been done by Terry and IGSD for us. And Gaines model also gives us an insight that what could be a good synergy. So if one uses, I'll not go into detail, the data is with this modeling data I can leave here, but if we increase the use of biogas, UP is a livestock rich country, and a household biogas technology is very much improved now. Gone are the days where cylinder and masonry based construction biogas plants at the household level were promoted, but now we have got very smart biodigester tubes which are very easy to install and very easy to operate. So if we use that, then PM 2.5 in 2045 scenario, because LPG PMUAY is actually linked with the income level of the households. So that will take time. We have to think upon the intermediate solutions for clean cooking. So increased biogas uses, I'll just focus this last one, can actually bring down PM 2.5 by 97%, black carbon by 92%, and carbon dioxide equivalent by 70%. This kind of an exercise has been done for all the mitigation measures which are there in our UP Clean Air Action Plan 2035 vision on airshed basis. So we've done a lot of exercise with the help of our partners, and there is a scope for great synergy and great strength in actually thinking on these lines. Then second thing is, every state is now having a state action plan for climate change. So there is a Government of India code under which a state action plan for climate change is developed. And that code actually has a sustainable habitat mission and green mission. These two missions can be leveraged for air quality management and this is what we have done in the state of Uttar Pradesh. So there, if you try to find out the harmonization, then your all clean air actions fit in very well under the 3 missions: Sustainable Habitat Mission, Green Mission, and the Strategic Knowledge Mission. Then this is something which is very, very encouraging. The airshed approach is a self-harmonizing solution. Like if you think of harmonizing climate action with clean air actions, then airshed actually focuses on different kind of sources of air pollution. When we talk of city to city approach, the sources are very, very different. But when we go on airshed, what we have found in the state of Uttar Pradesh, that maximum contributor to PM 2.5 annual average, UP's annual average is around 65, 66 microgram per meter cube. And out of that, 14 microgram per meter cube actually comes from clean cooking and space heating. So when you go on an airshed model, beyond city approach, because at city level, the uptake of Ujjwala Yojana is very good. But if you go to rural areas, the Ujjwala penetration is there, but refill is not there. So there actually you have to find out the intermediate solutions, and which can be very well synergized and harmonized with climate actions. Just think of any clean cooking solutions. There are 10 clean cooking solutions we have listed in our research. So ranging from induction cook stove to solar Nutan by IOCL to biodigesters, household based, to induction cooktops, to improved ICS, forced draft, improved cook stove, etc. So everywhere you will find that a good synergy comes out. Then second is heavy duty vehicles. In the city, we always talk of electrifying or fleet upgradation of public transport system. But when you go on a airshed level, then you have to think of heavy duty trucks. In our study, we have found that the heavy duty trucks are the major contributors within the transport sector on an airshed scale. So this gives you a third, which is very, very important. When you go for airshed approach, the third contributor is the agriculture and livestock sector. Use of urea, nitrogenous fertilizers, the ammonia emissions and nitrous emissions, they convert into secondary aerosols. What we are talking of PM 2.5 is basically the primary emissions, not secondary emissions. To the secondary aerosols, if you concentrate, then the natural farming and then the fertilizer use efficiency in the soil, those are the areas of intervention which can also be coupled very well with methane emissions from agricultural fields. Take the example of direct seeding of soil, direct seeding of paddy, etc. So there's a great approach of harmonizing if you adopt airshed approach, and we have strongly recommended that NCAP 2 must adopt this airshed approach. And I am happy to tell you that MOEFCC has started mulling over it, and very soon, I think the airshed coordination committee of 8 IGP states will see light of the day. This is the challenge. Just I am telling you one example, that clean cooking solutions are hard to uptake by the households because of cost. But we have built up a, you can say, strategy where 1,000 crores of carbon financing actually can come for clean cooking, which will bring down the cost to the end users. That is the kind of strength of climate harmony, climate change action harmony with clean air actions. The MNRE has declared Department of Environment, Forest and Climate Change as one of the implementing agencies for biodigesters, and we have got a target, good target also, and the MNRE is giving a subsidy of around 14,700, and the equal amount will come from carbon financing. And friends, I am happy to tell you, people and organizations are ready to make upfront investment to bring down the cost to the end user and recover the cost through voluntary carbon markets in the later. And a very happy story recently, the cooking from renewables actually is amended and covered under the compliance market also. The last thing which brings you a very you can say powerful strength to harmonizing climate action with clean air management is the green budget tagging. Our state is the first state who has done green budget tagging of the whole budget of UP. And at present, 26% of the budget, UP state's budget, is actually having a green component. And now we have rated every department as performer, achiever, and aspirant, so that it will be an year-on-year exercise, so that departments can actually improve their green rating. And the methodology which we have developed, we as environment department, we have done this green budget for a state of UP, and the methodology which we have followed, we have very carefully crafted the clean air actions also in the greenness of the schemes. Apart from climate actions, the clean air actions also crafted as the greenness of the schemes and programs of the departments. So this is how actually our CM was very, very positive for that. And now it will be a year-on-year exercise. This year also, we are actually educating different departments that how you can actually improve your green rating of your schemes. So that will also bring climate finance on your bag, and also the finances for clean air actions, which is always a challenge, I tell you. So at the last, I think we have to really shift to in NCAP 2. We have been advocating since last 4 years the airshed approach we have adopted, and NCAP 2 must have a vision, and ministry is on the same page. And second is the sources of air pollution which are invisible as of now in city to city approach: fertilizer use efficiency, livestock, decarbonization of power and transport sector, etc., should take a lead so that it synergizes well with the climate actions. And there is a need for carefully developing pathways. Just go back to the challenges which I have highlighted, try to highlight, so that if you have a very, very careful pathway, then definitely a good synergy will evolve to maximize the impact. Thank you so much.
Sort of the lot of things Tiwari ji said, I think the one thing that has been a common theme in this year's ICAS is move from the city to city approach, go for airshed approach, and go beyond the traditional pollutants. We will talk more, but can I request Anumita ma'am, you can use the mic here or go there to give her opening remarks.
Thanks a lot, Shagata. While listening to Ashish ji, what I really felt, it was so exciting that the next generation narrative that we need to build now around air pollution and climate, for many of us, it's still theoretical. But listening to Ashish ji, it's so clear that mature narrative has already started to evolve in the policy landscape, right? The fact that he could actually show data to demonstrate what co-benefit means, I think we are already getting there. So the big issue, the question that we really need to ask today, that for a long time, and many of us who have been fighting this very bitter battle on air pollution as a public health agenda, and very rightly so. At one level, the air pollution, at another level, talking about climate change, and the policy is also evolving on both these issues, but we have kept it in silos for a very long time. But clearly, what science is telling us now that we have to break the silo. And why? So if I go and be very specific about this one pollutant, which is particulate matter, which is driving all action and investment in the country today. So what is the science telling us? Yes, it's harming health, and a lot is emerging there. But science is also saying that there are subsets of particulates, like black carbon. They are much more warming, and they have a much greater warming potential than CO2. That's one. Second, if they settle on snow and glaciers, they melt, and there's a water security threat that it creates. And then it also interferes with cloud formation and impacts rainfall patterns. So there are so many different dimensions to that one tiny particle that we have been talking about for so long. Now, if science is saying that, is there a policy response to that or not? Now, this is where what we find, that's why we have such a weak spotlight on this dimension of particulate pollution, is that currently when we talk about particulate matter, in the air pollution policies, it is not, of course, treated as a criteria pollutant. WHO or any other country, you do not regulate BC, the black carbon, nor do you set a monitoring strategy for it, nor do you have a standard for it. But the assumption is that because it's a subset of particulate matter, and if you have a strategy in place to control particulate pollution, then it will also reduce BC. So the focus is more on source-specific emission management. Where the BC is coming from, you deal with it. The other reason why we have such a weak spotlight from the climate change narrative perspective is that black carbon is still not included in the basket of pollutant that UNFCCC deals with, right? As a part of the negotiation and the commitment, the global, the negotiation process that we have. Even though IPCC has done its science to say that what is the warming potential of black carbon and what we need to do about it. So clearly these are the reasons why we have not seen a very specific and deliberate integration of these aspects of particulate pollution in our policies. But what is very interesting at a global level, I remember in COP26 when WHO had reviewed all the NDCs, the nationally determined contribution reports that had come from different countries, they had found that the number of NDCs, including air pollution, in their reporting has actually doubled, right? So more and more countries are actually reporting on their air pollution action, and which can therefore become an opportunity. Even though India has not yet done that explicitly in their NDC, but the low carbon pathway report that India has submitted in COP27 has a passing reference to the fact that air pollution will provide the co-benefit. So therefore, it's very important that all of us try and build on this to create the policy opportunity. Now here, then the question is, why do we need the alignment? Let us first quickly look at some of the science aspect of it. So in fact, the point that Ashish just made, that some particles warm, but some also cool. So this warming versus cooling particulates. So if the BC is coming from diesel, it's going to be warming impact. If it's from the cook stove and forest fire, maybe more sulfates and therefore more cooling effect, But very interesting, so at some point people said, then does it mean that it's okay to have the cooling particles in the air because it's going to cool down the atmosphere? But then scientists have also pointed out there's something called the unmasking. So in fact, if you looked at the whole narrative, the science that has come up now, they are saying that the warming that has already been committed because of CO2 concentration in the world globally, a lot of it is masked currently. It's not showing up because of the cooling particles. But because air pollution action is also becoming more stringent across the world, the cooling particles are going away. And the warming impact is showing up more. And the Jim Hansen last year actually made the connection between 2023 being the warmest year in history with this fact, said that this is one of the reasons. that while we are cleaning up the air, the warming is showing up more. Another reason why we need to look into the alignment is, even in our policies, we have to ensure that as a developing country, we are going through that transitional strategies, that whatever decision we take should not have a trade-off. And this is very well demonstrated in this whole diesel versus CNG issue. So I still remember when the CNG program happened in Delhi, what was said that, okay, you are getting rid of diesel, which is actually more fuel efficient and giving you a CO2 advantage, and you are bringing in CNG, which is going to emit methane, and therefore it will have more warming impact. But then I remember the studies carried out by British Columbia and others that showed that while it is true that the warming impact of CNG had increased because of the methane emissions, but because CNG has also replaced diesel, which is a BC emitter, and the old diesel, much higher emitter, so the overall potential has actually reduced, right? So this means we have to therefore include these two criteria whenever we are taking any decision, that are we resolving the trade-off or are we getting caught in the trade-off, right? So having said that, now my final issue is that if air pollution program has evolved in India so much and we now have a national clean air program, is it helping us to deliver on the core benefit objective or not? Because that's what we want to look at, because currently our cities and states are implementing Clean Air Action Plan and also Climate Change Action Plan, right? And also something called an Environmental Action Plan. So now, where is the synergy? Now here, therefore, what I would say, that when we look at it only through the NCAP prism, for some reason, because, and I understand the reason, that because the PM 2.5 monitoring was very limited when we had started, so the focus was on benchmarking action based on PM 10. So as a result, it has directed action more towards dust control, which is also showing up in a way we are also doing our investment. So about 64% of the whole investment that has come for NCAP, more than close to 9,000 crore, has gone for dust control, road, and that we already know. But this also means that the combustion sources, transport, industry, waste, they are getting neglected, but that's where the whole combination of short-lived climate forces and the health-threatening pollutants are, right? And we have to address that. So therefore, what we find that the action that we need to take in these sectors are quite minimal at that stage. But still, let us look at the opportunity. While we have a problem there, and going forward, NCAP 2.0 has to address this issue, but NCAP itself has created the opportunity in a different way, because NCAP allows us also to report action under convergence funding, which means that in each sector, other funding that is available for waste management, for transport, you also need to report on progress in that. That's why when you heard Gorakhpur right now, and so much you heard about very good waste management there, right? It's all getting driven also by the Swachh Bharat and the funding that is available, and a target-driven funding, okay? So that means the message here is going forward that if we have to see co-benefit, we have to see more convergence across sectors. And we have to align the all and have a conscious incorporation of the indicators that will show both climate and air pollution benefit. And the other opportunity is in the ranking, the Swachh Vayu ranking that is happening today. Good thing is that even though NCAP ranking is primarily focused on PM10 reduction, but this as Swachh Vayu ranking, it is ranking cities based on action taken in 8 different sectors. Now, if you are ranking cities based on action, that is an opportunity to influence the real implementation on ground, and we must build on that. So my final point, therefore, what I would say going forward, that we need now to take this agenda forward, a multi-pollutant approach. So no longer just PM 2.5, but as you said, that we also need to look at whole range of, especially ozone, nitrogen oxide. So all of them, the whole bunch of them, the moment you take a multi-pollutant and a multi-sectoral approach, that is going to give us, and that will also maximize the benefits that we are looking for. And very important takeaway from what you said, Ashish, about going beyond city, taking a regional approach. It is not only to reduce the regional impact on air pollution, but the moment you do that, it also opens up opportunity for not only transboundary movement of pollution, but at the same time, the regional level ozone formation, secondary pollutants, these are all coming up in all our source apportionment studies, but we have not yet integrated that in our action. So that's where we are looking at, and that's what I would say, that if there is a target-driven NCAP program, and if there is a target-driven climate change program, keeping in mind that we have to reduce the energy intensity of our growth by 45% by 2030, and also have 50% energy from renewable sources, 1 billion ton of carbon reduction, if that is the goal, then all of this will have to get translated through the climate budgeting and the tagging tool that we have just heard, not only for the budget. At the moment you start looking at the indicators across all the funding program and schemes, you will see that we are already on its way, but without joining the dots. So that's where we are. So all the future performance-linked funding and programs will have to very consciously build the co-benefit framework for co-control of emissions. Thank you.
She's covered it all, isn't it? It's masterclass. So two things that stayed with me is, the warming versus cooling. How do you make sure that, you are not getting caught in the trade-off? But we're going to come back to that. But the other thing that I want to hold your thought, ma'am, is this reporting of two parallel streams has to be integrated. And right now, we have a set of indicators under NCAP. So how do we develop the next indicators that will affect? And that has to be incorporated. But we will have more questions. But can I request Aarti to share her perspective, and also, given her experience, what are some of the other countries doing? But yes.
Thanks very much. It's always a hard act to follow after Anumita.
I don't try, so I just give it to you.
Before I move to other countries, I think just even for India, it will be nice to see how air quality goals and climate goals could link with each other. And, the reason why I'm here is also not because I'm an academic or a technical expert, but simply because we have spent some time in the last 10 years to understand how people perceive climate issues and how people are perceiving air quality. And a few reflections that I want to share from there is, when you ask people on what is air quality bringing as the biggest change, I think they see their microclimate, what is around them. And when you ask people also about climate and the lived experience of climate, they mostly talk about their microclimate. So the fact that both air quality as well as climate, when it comes down to public understanding, in the end is about how it's impacting their microclimate is really a peek into how people think. If it affects their quality of life, it affects their day-to-day, there is better transport, there is less pollution, there are clearer skies, they just relate it to better climate, quote unquote, and that itself shows one way in which both air quality and climate should be linked in policy making, because it's also linked in public understanding. We did a survey actually through some of our partners who did it in other countries, and about 2,000 people in 20 countries were surveyed. And people were asked on what do they think about the changing climate and how it can be improved. And surprisingly, when you ask general public, there is nothing like general public, but when you ask informed audiences on what their views are, more than 70 or 75% of people just answered in two ways: protecting nature, quote unquote, and reducing pollution. Whatever that means into how policy making has to translate, but that's how people understand these issues. I'll move on to health as well, because Ashish Tiwari sir made a very important point that in the narrative frame, it is quite important to not frame air quality as a health crisis, but to frame it as an economic crisis. The other side of it is when, people who can make change, like media, they write about it. there is highest resonance when journalists write about health impacts of climate change. That resonates more with people. And what resonates more with people, we found out, is not when they talk about how many deaths, but when they talk about how my parents or your kids will be impacted. That has maximum resonance with people. So that's also something about human psychology in how people perceive the messaging. But with regards to it being an economic crisis, I think there is a direct link with climate as well. Extreme weather events, La Nina, El Nino, a cyclone building up in the Arabian Sea as we speak, which is rare for this time of the year, warming oceans, as well as the kind of extreme weather events that we are seeing from Himachal through Tripura to Wayanad, etc., has made it quite clear that climate impacts will be non-linear. And I suppose the fact that they are non-linear and the fact that air quality spikes happen throughout the year are fairly non-linear as well is another way in which this has to be framed as a joint economic opportunity, if anything. I don't want to digress too much, but when we talk about international scenario, I think it's worth mentioning how when international events like the Conference of Parties happen and the G20 happens, whenever there is discussion on climate, there is big discussion on what finance for climate will look like. India, because it's in a status of an emerging economy, it's in a unique position. It's not China where it's being looked at to contribute to funding the rest of the problems of the world, but it is also not among the least developing countries. So there is expectation that India is the voice of the global south. And I suppose if there is some crafting of the narrative on how in countries across Africa even and in a lot of emerging economies, climate gains and air quality gains can come together if you can package that in a way that policy making over 2 or 3 issues, whether it may be something as specific as diesel trucks or it may be as specific as renewables or moving to solar and taking away emissions from power sector, or even as specific as cooling demand, will go a very, very long way. Just a little bit of specifics on each one of those even. I mean, both Anumita and Ashish ji spoke about trucks, and I was reading a statistic which said trucks alone account for just 3 to 4% of the vehicle fleet in India, but at least 25 to 30% of oil import bill of the country. That itself is a staggering statistic, apart from the fact that frankly nobody cares what brand a truck is, but I very much care what brand my car is, just to give one example. It's more the reason that shifting fully from diesel trucks to zero emission trucks, reducing tailpipe emissions as well, is something that should be brought to fruition sooner than later and will meet the goals of short-lived climate pollutants, black carbon, as well as just general reduction of pollution of trucks that are going through cities, for example. But similarly, some of the other things as well. Power demand. In 2 years back, for the first time when the heat wave struck, I am a Delhiite, and the temperatures hit 49 degrees. And after that, there was just a feedback loop where India increased import of coal, increased blending of coal, imported coal with existing domestic coal, etc. And now we are at a point where every year we are seeing that kind of increase in power demand, and we are seeing the coming back of coal expansion in power plants as well. I suppose there is something to be understood there as well on are you going to increase sources of emission as power demand rises, or is it something to be considered where you even look at better cooling facilities? India has a big cooling plan. We not just have nationally determined contributions on climate and the National Clean Air Action Plan, we also have a National Cooling Action Plan. And among a lot of the elements of that Cooling Action Plan, one of the commitments is to kind of reduce refrigerant use. And refrigerants and leaking of refrigerants is going to be a big contributor to short-lived pollutants. They stay much smaller in the air. They have a very long-term impact. But I suppose when top-level policy making is being thought of, there is a need to integrate all of these. Having binding NCAP targets, perhaps, experts will be able to speak more. But the nationally determined contributions are internationally binding. And we have committed ourselves to having 450 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. We have committed ourselves to energy intensity targets, energy efficiency targets. A revision is expected next year at some point. A lot of countries internationally have looked at signing the global methane pledge. US is on it, without speaking anything about US's own hypocrisy on climate action. At least, they have committed to a global methane target. It meets their national criteria. But India, the way our landfills and waste management is being treated, there is a window of opportunity to also look at what can be done on waste management, for example. I think the short point that I'm trying to make is integrating some of the policies to some extent possible. And I will just quip by making a mention that 2 years back, energy transition became the buzzword and just transition became the buzzword. Everybody started talking about just transition. It has to be equitable, it has to be fair, we all understand. But look at it, in India, some 18 ministries do the inter-ministerial coordination for energy transition. And it is very hard to front-load any of the real policy measures that can happen either at the central level or at the state level or even at the level of, business or corporate sector when there are so many ministries involved in looking at one particular aspect. And I suppose just if sectoral coordination can happen, maybe looking at energy sector, renewables targets, cooling demand, 6 times the cooling demand that we have now will happen in 2040. Heat stress is not going to stop. How is it that we look at power demand, cooling demand, refrigerant use, air quality targets? How is it that we look at transport, vehicle fleet, electric truck fleet, zero emission trucks, as well as air quality gains? How is it that we look at airshed approach? Sir spoke about it, but also just moving the narrative from beyond cities, because that's not where it exists. Beyond cities is where the industries and power plants exist. Who is bringing all of that together? I think there is some work that has happened in the last 5 to 10 years in having climate integrated across levels of policy making. We have the national action plans on climate change. We have the state action plans on climate change. Some 75 districts, 75% of districts have district action plans on climate change. How is it that we can also integrate some of the air quality measures in already existing policy is something to be thought of. And in the end, I started with how people think, and I will only say that for me, that still remains important on how people understand certain issues. In the end, we are all public to somebody or the other, and it's also not that every person on the street really has to know about the change that we are trying to make. If we mobilize or educate or build knowledge of 2-3% of the population, that is enough to bring policy change. That's the kind of critical mass that we are looking at. And I suppose in air quality, just because it became such a visible public campaign and such a visible icon of how people see environment and sustainability, at least in the last decade or so, certainly more than 2 to 3% people have been mobilized across the country. I think that's the critical mass that we will be after, just as we talk more and more about climate and air quality.
Out of the many things you said, a couple of things deeply resonated. One is of course, yes, if this climate change is real, I don't think anyone needs to say if 2023 or 2024 was the hottest. If you spend time in Delhi in May and June, you wouldn't ever doubt that, okay? Take it from a Delhiite. But the bigger issue is that can India be that beacon of hope for the Global South to take this forward. So we've talked, all three of you, and I will come back to the audience for questions, but I want to start by asking all three of you, we've all talked about integrating policies for climate, and that's a common theme that all three of you. But are there, and if there are, we can start listing them down here, are there, and I know there are common policy levers that can, impact both, reduce both climate pollutants and short-lived climate pollutants and air pollutants. So in the existing suite of policies that we have, ma'am, you can start, and then sir, one of you can take this.
So, common policies where we can get the leveraging for both. That's what you are really looking at. So, absolutely yes. And I think going forward, what we really need to focus on, that what are those big win solutions in each sector that we must focus on. And anything that we do in terms of those big wins, we need to be very conscious about the indicators to track the change in emissions, like what Ashish has just done, what we saw him doing. That is what is needed. Now, in that, what I would say that whether it's for air pollution or for climate change, what are we really looking for at the end of the day? We are looking for a massive energy transition. Okay, no longer incremental transitional changes with intermediate solutions, but how do we quickly move towards a very scalable solution that we need to see, but of course, in a cost-effective and an affordable manner. Second, what we really require is the big mobility transition. And that means that you are really reducing dependence on automobiles, but then with all the other strategies on transit-oriented development policy, compact city development, walking, cycling, electrification. So that's the whole one range where we have to look at. And the third is the circularity. That's what we all know, and the policies are already in place, right? What is needed for that common approach is that have we really identified the right enablers and the accelerators which will make the solution scalable with speed? Because it cannot just take forever to get things done on ground. So the focus has to be on that. So if in the transport sector we are saying that we need to move towards zero emission, whether that's through electrification or by decarbonizing overall mass transport, or in the industrial sector where you are looking at the energy transition, and we just heard from the steel industry that yes, we may go to the ultimate energy solution like hydrogen at some point when that becomes cost effective, but there are many interesting pathways to that with the scrap and other utilization, improving the processes, technology. But that would mean we need very good characterization of the industrial processes and technology and identify where do we need to intervene. And the other is, the few big wins are that one is the household energy. That just has to become, and that is really part of the just transition, actually, the poor people's household. And And the other big, like you said, heavy-duty industry. So what I would say that in future, let us identify what are those big scalable solutions that we must prioritize, where we put all our funding and create the institutional mechanism, compliance mechanism, so that you can really see the change happening on ground. And the focus has to be on curbing what we now call the real-world emissions. That has to be the driver of the change.
Ashish sir, please. Up.
See, like integrating policies, like policy landscape is very well integrated, then it can actually deliver the desired output. Take, for example, what Maharashtra has done for electrification of rural feeders, solarization of rural feeders. What UP is doing, at one hand we are having electric mobility and manufacturing policy, which gives you incentives for electrification of two-wheelers, three-wheelers and public transport system also. And now under clean air management project, we are focusing on heavy-duty trucks also. And on the other side is the PM Suryodaya Yojana. So you have just to explain to a household that if you have electric vehicle and PM Suryodaya solar rooftop power plant in place, your mobility is basically not zero emission but zero cost. So you have to really innovate how basically the policies can bring a cumulative impact. That is one thing. Second example which I would like to cite is PM Pranam scheme. The PM Pranam scheme actually focuses on reducing the use of urea and transferring that subsidy element, 50% of subsidy element to the farmers, to the estates. But at the same time, if we blend it with a kind of our bioenergy mission of MNRE, and that whatever biocompost is coming from bioenergy plants can actually improve the soil carbon and fertilizer use efficiency. So I have just given you one or two examples where you have to actually innovate between different policies at the implementation level. So that will bring out maximization of impact and build more harmony and synergy between climate action and air pollution.
So I will come back to all of you about reporting and prior to that monitoring of the pollutants, but it's a good time to open this up to the audience. Please introduce yourself. If you're directing a question to the, I know. If you're directing a question to the panelists, please address it, or else to general. We'll start with Zerin, then Soumya and Anshika. I know all of you, but I'd suggest that please introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks Swagata for that. And firstly, I would like to thank CSTEP for having us all here for this very important discussion. My name is Zerin Osho. I'm the director of the India program at IGSD. And Ashish sir, thank you so much for giving us an opportunity to work with the state of Uttar Pradesh. Of all the states that we have been engaged with, Uttar Pradesh is certainly at a different point in time of success and progression. So my question actually leads from what Swagata asked, the question of key levers, so to say. We are looking at the India carbon markets being launched in 2026. Ministry of Power, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, MOEF, all have put distinctive plans and frameworks ahead on what are the different sectors that are under their jurisdictions that they're going to open trading to. I'm curious to know, because MOEF is the driving nodal ministry in the country on this issue of air pollution and climate, given the usage of GWP 100 for SLCPs, we're essentially looking at losing a market opportunity. So if he built like a market, and I'm just making this up, but if he were to consider a market where like for like was traded, so black carbon was traded only in a dedicated black carbon trading market, methane, for example, would be traded in a dedicated methane market, we would be at GWP 20, which is when the peak or the maximum impact is noted. We would be creating a market opportunity for faster action on those. So I'm just curious to know, do you see, because Uttar Pradesh is moving progressively on implementation, do you see this happening, and if so, in what form? Will this be driven by states? Would this be driven by MOEF? Is this even a consideration? Thank you very much.
MOEFCC is elder brother. So I think you have made a very valid point, and ultimately see, so far as the potential of SLCPs are concerned, it is really a very near, you can say, near target. And our carbon markets, in whatever form, I am thinking of a different objective, that if we go for a voluntary market, then the cost of your credit is not that high. So better strategy would be to advocate it to put in a compliance market under NDC framework. Then probably I think you're thinking of Indian carbon market. If you are included in NDC, then you will be tagging yourself to global carbon market.
Soumya?
Hello, thank you, sir, for the really good presentations. My name is Soumya Singh. I'm from IFM Bhopal. I'm an assistant professor there. So my question to Ashish Tiwari sir, that sir, it was great to just hear about the ammonia term in your presentation. So you talked about the primary versus secondary, and agriculture being third largest contributor to PM. So me and my friend Srinidhi from IT Bombay, we work on ammonia. We were discussing that this is the first time, I mean, at least in my, attending all the conferences in India, somebody from government talking about ammonia and, that source. So could you please actually also talk about what kind of efforts and discussions are being, done at government level to curb the primary emissions like ammonia in that direction?
See,
Thank you
the
so much.
biggest component which we are thinking of is like intervention in agriculture sector. That is the biggest approach for us in next 5 years, because UP being an agriculture rich state and so much of urea is used in agriculture fields, and secondly it is also linked to the farmers' income also, because part of investments in agriculture, the lion's share is of fertilizers, that too of urea. So, and lot of runoff is also there, and the disadvantages of runoff and urea coming into water sources is also one of the area of the concern. So, see, like the natural farming is, of course, there is a challenge with respect to food security. That also we will have to keep in our mind. But see what China has done, they have decoupled their you can say fertilizer use per hectare and their production. Like it has decoupled the growth. Like fertilizer use is going down and production is going up. Whereas in our country the fertilizer is going up and production is going down. So that is our major area of concern which we are thinking, and presently there is no package of practice for fertilizer use efficiency. We don't have a very robust evidence-based package of practice for fertilizer use efficiency. So we wish to develop a kind of a, based on a 50,000 hectare pilot. First we want to develop a package of practice for fertilizer use efficiency, then it to implement, and also the state is looking forward to reap highest benefits of PM Pranam scheme. That will, I think, double the farmers' income.
Yeah, no form of policy should, affect incomes of the poor people. We'll go with Anshika and then Dr. Maithil.
Yeah, I am Samir Maithil. I work on energy and environment issues, and one of the sectors in which I work is the brick sector. A question to both Anumita and Tiwari ji. Now, as you rightly said that we have to move faster, and then some of the small industries which are there, they are also contributing to CO2 emissions, as well as to black carbon, as well as air pollution. So that means we have to transform these sectors. So one of the issues is that what do you think, how do we, when these policies are now being made, how do we engage the industry and the workers as well? Because they also employ a very large number of workers into the policy making. Because my experience of last 10 years says that when we make policy and if we are not engaging with them, so when we try to implement policies, then we get we are not able to move faster. So how do you think that the policies are made in such a manner that when it goes for implementation, the implementation is faster?
See, Sameerji, thank you very much. I think you have hit the right nail. In fact, MSME is the most difficult sector for any kind of clean and sustainable interventions. There was an ASCO scheme of Bureau of Energy Efficiency, ESL. It was a wonderful scheme without zero investment, SIDBI on the other side to finance that also, but it didn't take off. So there are two things, like one is the having proper systems to control the emissions, and the other is to have in place a proper technology which reduces the emission to a certain level. But for MSME, I think the policies for air or greenhouse gas emissions or air pollution control would require definitely hand-holding from the government, and you have to really build a very robust communication strategy to make them understand. The open access of open access provision on solar energy, they have given an opportunity for MSMEs to have solar power plants as one of the inputs to reduce their emissions and have this thing economize their electricity use also. But I think the real kind of a research and you can say the implementation research has to be done for MSME sector. It's very, very challenging. And there has to be some government support also. But what I fear that if support is for technology upgradation, then it will work. But if continuous kind of subsidy, which always MSME demands for PNG, etc., they always say that PNG is very costly, the TTZ area, Taj Trapezium Zone area has a subsidy, we should also get subsidy. So that kind of subsidy will be unsustainable, but subsidy for technology upgradation which will reduce the emission will really work out in MSME sector.
Ma'am, would you quickly want to make a comment?
I mean, you have said it all. It just came to my mind. So yes, clearly it's very challenging to address MSME sector. And clearly what is emerging today that in that sector, one, that, and what the government is already talking about, that how do we take a cluster-based approach so that there is a state support for a lot of common infrastructure that is needed for the MSME sector. So like we are already talking about, say, common boilers, right? And the moment you make that shift, you are able to deal with all the tiny boilers and the emission control is possible. Now the thing is, how do we enable that? We know there are a lot of ground challenges to enable that. So that's one, that we need to look at those kind of approaches, cluster-based, with support, because you also have to make the transition affordable. Clearly, in the MSME sector, we also have to work more with technology mandates rather than emission standard-based, monitoring-based approach. So the kiln in the brick kilns have to change. The technology has to change. That's the other thing. But other very interesting thing is that how we create pull factors through our air pollution policies. And a very good example is the stubble burning in Punjab and Haryana. The fact that today the ex-situ solutions and the pressure on the industry in NCR to switch from coal to cleaner fuel and the pull that it has created for the biomass, okay, intermediate, not the final solution, but we see how the MSME sector evolving there to create pellets, to build a supply chain around it, right? And the third is that the way, and we need to understand that how climate change creates opportunity for the other genre of enterprise around circularity. So the whole recycling industry that is emerging today to close the loop around waste. So we really have to understand whole range of interventions that are going to happen in that sector and whether we are supporting and enabling that or not with the right fiscal policies.
Right. Quickly from Anshika, and then we'll have a question from Subbu.
Add one line to Samir ji. Like what Anumita ji has mentioned is very, very important. Like UP is a hub of washing and dyeing industries, particularly NCR region and other places also. So about 23 industrial areas, we have done a pre-feasibility studies, and we have found that about 12 industrial areas clusters, not areas clusters, they have good potential for uptake of common steam boiler scheme. So if a common steam boiler is installed, then with a long term, and see the investment is also very, very encouraging. The steam house and other players, they are saying that we need a land on subsidized rate, that's all, with long term steam purchase agreement for about 15 years. And we had discussed with stakeholders also, because of non-compliance of baby boilers and closure of industries, they are also very positive. So, but here, the investment out of UP investment and employment generation policy, the capital incentive is coming up very, very helpful, and things will come up in future. So this is why I am saying that we have to work on technology upgradation.
Anshika, quickly.
I'm Anshika and I work with the policy team at the air quality sector. So, thank you to the entire panelists. One of the key takeaways from the entire panel was that we need to have integrative policies across space and spectrum. And a lot of it would eventually rest on building technical capacities of these state institutions and of the line departments that are working in tandem with each other. And so, from my perspective, CSTEP does a lot of these capacity building workshops, and there's still a very siloed approach in looking at things. And specifically in terms of in second tier and third tier towns and other villages, how do you come about bridging this gap? And
Aarti, do you want to take that? Building capacity together.
I mean, I think let me answer this with some of the previous conversations around MSMEs. A point was made about carbon credits, about carbon border adjustment tax. Even if you look at that thing, everything is linked, you know. The Europeans have imposed what is known as a carbon border adjustment tax, which means 2026 onwards, if any goods are going to come which are emission intensive, they will be taxed. Now that tax will be passed on to the exporting country naturally, but the exporting country suppliers or exporters have to file at least a 400-page marathon document which really lists where they are sourcing their material from, which companies and suppliers are supplying to them, what is their emission and what is the emission of the companies that is supplying to them. And unless you don't have an integrated way, I suppose, of looking at how institutional capacity is being built, where you do a step-by-step process of how to even answer that question of what is the emission of company A, and if company A is sourcing from B and C, what is that emission in the supply chain or the value chain? I don't think anybody in the world has these questions, and I was reading yesterday that Europeans are struggling because they have massive amount of Chinese imports. India is still less. The Chinese suppliers are giving either half information or false information and no information because they don't have a way to find out as well. And you're trying to create a whole mechanism to disincentivize imports from countries where you think emissions are. In the end, you are trying to prevent carbon leakage in Europe, but you're also not encouraging any kind of emission reduction back in the export state because you don't have systems for it. So I think we are at a point where runaway changes in climate and runaway changes in air quality are far rapid. We are setting up some legal frameworks, but I suppose in simple language, I only feel that we don't have institutional mechanisms. Now the question of how those institutional mechanisms should be set up or what should they look like, where should they start? I think that's not my subject, to be honest, but somebody who really looks at what institutional networks must be strengthened really has to look at what kind of things you're looking at. India is not just a country with largest MSMEs, I suppose will also be the largest share of MSMEs in emissions across the world. So if we are not looking at that major chunk and we are entering into a state where unilateral trade agreements will impose things like carbon border tax, we will only have a case where big companies who are doing big exports are going to look at better cement and better steel, and will only be a handful of those projects, but the rest of it will just be left without that deep look. That's how I think this is.
Ashish ji.
And I think that young researcher has raised a very valid point of coordinated approach for air pollution. It's a very cross-cutting issue. 17 to 23 departments are involved, and when you are harmonizing climate action also, then the coordination challenge becomes. So little bit of success has been achieved in UP, and because we have also been struggling on this issue of coordination and a coordinated approach with all the departments. So what our government has done with visionary guidance of our higher officers, we had a brainstorming session. Then we found out that with all due respect to pollution control boards, because I have also worked in pollution control board, there is a organization called Directorate of Environment, and that actually can be an institutional strengthening of Directorate of Environment, who has the sole work of actually doing coordination with all other departments. They don't have their own any, you can say, intrinsic work, or the only role is for coordination. So if the UP has strengthened the Directorate of Environment with human resources, researchers, and etc., and their collaboration with all like-minded organizations, so that has started yielding some results. You must have seen the good progress in air quality field and climate action field, implementation of a state action plan for climate change also. So somewhere we have to think of building an institution who can actually work full-time for coordination of air pollution and climate action.
I can just add to this, Shagota, because what Ashishji and Aarti you have said on coordination. So one is to have the institutional framing for coordination. Another important thing is, but what is the coordinated action? Now, if you look at the indicators that are already evolving for reporting and compliance under NCAP, many of these indicators have not yet been built into the standard operating procedures of the departments. So you see that even if CPCB may have given 258 indicators to report on for different sectors, many indicators remain unreported.
So now you're
That's
adding
one.
a layer of complexity
Absolutely.
of climate.
And the second aspect of the coordination that we have to look at, several of our national policies are already pretty good, well integrated. But while we are implementing it, often we find we just pick and choose elements from it and not implement in totality. For example, transit-oriented development policy says that to build closer to the transit nodes, bring a lot more people to live close to the transit nodes, have walkable, cyclable access to the public transport. And if you do that, the construction industry is going to get extra floor area ratio so that they can build more. But when the implementation happens, we find that the FAR happens, so we build more, but we do not do the other requirements that are part of the TOD requirement, which means when we are clearing the project, we are not approving based on all the indicators needed for implementation of that project. So unless we look into this entire chain of coordination from the institutional framework to coordinated implementation, we will not get the solution.
This is a challenge of institutional framework also. I'll just try to explain that. Take example of metro rail corporations. They are entrusted with laying of metro railway lines and operation of metro system. But see, the real delivery would be if a metro rail corporation also becomes area developer. That there lies actually the catch. Then the transit-oriented development will take place.
Absolutely.
We'll have one question from Dr. Subramaniam, because I don't have much of a choice there.
Oh my God, no. Thank you to all of the panelists. Tiwari, your talk was fantastic. I think you touched upon a lot of different things, including heavy-duty diesel emissions, residential combustion. I think you even talked about methane, and Anumita and Aarti, your talks were also really great. So thank you very much for that. To some extent, I'm sort of playing devil's advocate here, in the sense that I think you mentioned ammonia, and I think you brought up a really important point that it is also tied with food security, and ammonia also leads to air pollution from ammonium sulfate or ammonium nitrate, as the case may be. But I think as Dan Westerveld had a talk earlier yesterday, saying that when you do the air quality modeling, there are cooling aerosols and there are warming aerosols, and I think you also mentioned that in your talk. Considering that, especially in India, where food security can be a major concern, is there a prioritization for air pollution control on warming aerosols? And you mentioned heavy-duty diesel trucks and residential combustion, maybe even diesel generators, for example, over, for example, something like ammonia, which might generate cooling aerosols. And while, of course, it's air pollution, it sort of is a benefit, at least in the shorter term. So, I mean, prioritization of these black carbon-rich source sectors, if you will, over the other aerosol sources. And sort of a small side question, if I may sneak it in. You mentioned that heavy-duty diesel trucks, and so what is the solution for that? I mean, does that include electrified rail freight, for example? I think so. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, very rightly, all the points you've raised are really rightly, and really we have to really be develop a very conscious, thoughtful pathways, like phasing out of heavy duty trucks. I'll pick up from the last point, like you will shift to BS6. That means you will not be solving problem to the large extent. If you shift to LNG, then also there is a challenge. And if you want to shift to electric trucks, then the cost is the biggest challenge. And the ecosystem also, which will come in future. So the kind of like we will have to think of kind of keeping in mind the trade-offs, etc. What could be the best option? Prioritization is of course one of the things we will have to keep in mind while mentioning a careful crafted pathways. In fact, I wanted to have in mind all these things only, and it is a really kind of a very sensitive field, and I think here comes the role of researchers to actually guide the policymakers on this.
Yeah, but the heavy duty is really the hot issue right now. So, so I think what Ashish ji said, clearly those are the big challenges, but let's still look at some of the opportunities emerging today. So one, because now the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways has a very conscious policy to their scrappage policy, where they want to come up with an incentive, and they want to have an incentive policy to renew the fleet of the trucks. Now, if we can do that in a very targeted way with the right incentive and support, that will be a catalyst. But if we can link up the renewal not only with BS6, but also electrification, which may sound like a science fiction for many, but the reality right now is that the FAME 3 is already setting aside a big sum of money for electric trucks. And the way they are trying to implement it, to identify very specific use cases, not a general thing that let truck operators purchase an electric truck, that will not work. But suppose you say a PSU, say NTPC has its own fleet of truck, you work with them, and that specific use case gets targeted for electrification, that will work. So I think we are working in that direction, and with FAME support and with a lot of these specific organizations coming forward to take this up, we will see the change. Because there is a lesson from our electric bus program, which is a success story in the world, and which has shown that how with strategic support we could create a scalable electric bus market, which has now reduced the cost to the level of a diesel, even less than a diesel bus, per kilometer procurement basis, and which is saying that you can now even have an electric bus program without a subsidy and just with a payment guarantee scheme. So if there is a lesson there, then I think we can replicate similar lesson for the heavy duty truck as well.
Just to add to that on heavy duty trucks, because we have done a lot of work on that. See, we are giving incentive to off-road the truck. Off-road it. And if you want to purchase a new truck, then of course the incentive is available for electric trucks only. Then only, and so many, like we have discussed with transporters associations, they are saying that running a non-BS or BS1, BS2 truck with a fitness certificate, which also costs you something every year, and they operate smaller distances, the earning is around 20,000-30,000 rupees a month net earning. So if some incentive for off-roading that truck is given, then we are willing. So we have kept that in mind. And of course the FAME 3, which is coming in with the investments on heavy duty trucks, coupled with the 3%, the recently announced MORTH, the purchase incentive with the registered RVSF certificate, and on top of that the scrap value of the truck. So these are the few drivers which can actually help the aggregators to actually modernize their fleets. Swagata rightly mentioned the garbage trucks with the municipal corporations, the big aggregators, they may come forward, but for individual, I think incentive for off-roading may work. We are doing a pilot. Let us see what comes out of it.
So we'll hear from about the pilot. I think this is this is a next step after NCAP and NDCs, and this is, we hope that next ICAS we have a reporting structure, some indicators. But we'll close the session now because this is the second time this week I'm standing between a meal and the audience. So I will not try and sum up the depth of discussion because we've touched upon so many points, but we're available over lunch. But can I please thank all three of you to take time of your very busy schedules to come and talk about this. I don't think we could have put together a better panel. So thank you, all of you, and may I request Dr. Subramaniam to come up and give a small token.